Welcome back to The Assignment, the conclusion of our topic exploring news addiction or aversion. As world events continue to spiral at an increasingly rapid rate, people's mental health and its relationship to how closely they are paying attention to the news has come to the forefront of our consciousness as a society. Exploring our relationship with what we pay attention to is now a critical part of how we move through the world. It's also worth noting that this episode was recorded over a 2-month period leading up to the inauguration of Donald Trump, so between December 2024 and January 2025.
Please also be reminded that this podcast deals with mature topics and is intended for an adult audience. Additionally, we sometimes discuss graphic and disturbing content, which may prove distressing for some listeners, in addition to ourselves.
I'm fine, Anna.
I'm so glad. So, Shannon, our next topic is COVID, one of the biggest global stories of our time and of all of the times around us.
It's crazy to think that was 5 years ago. You know, I had a little bit of an interesting time remembering COVID because unlike a lot of people, COVID wasn't necessarily a terrible thing in my life. I feel like a terrible person saying that.
This is about honesty, Shannon.
It's an honest program. That's it. So in early 2020, I was just rounding the 4th year for working for a company where I sort of loved the work, but was starting to feel that sort of Sunday scaries feeling of dread. Here we go again, going back after Christmas vacation. And that kind of said to me, like, it was maybe time to be thinking about something else. And the one thing that was kind of getting me through my depression of returning to work after New Year's was a vacation that we were planning with our best couple friends, Charles and Anna.
Yeah, that seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?
It really, really does. So JC and I had never been on vacation together. We had come to Clare every summer that we were still living out west. And then by the time we made it back here and moved in, JC started a business and he couldn't step away. And like, honestly, we just couldn't afford it. Those first few years were pretty lean years. So,
yeah, we were so excited about that. And we were so excited to be part of JC's first trip out of the country.
Totally excited and all a little nervous.
Oh, the anticipation.
So in January of that year, we started seeing news reports of this terrible virus that was affecting people in China that they were calling the Wuhan virus. We felt confident. I remember us booking our flights. We were like, oh, yeah, but that's fine. They're going to figure that out. And you know,
that'll be short-lived.
Short-lived, whatever. That's so far away. And I remember I had stayed home with the flu that January and made the horrendous error of watching the movie Contagion on Netflix, which was pretty intense foreshadowing of what was to befall us all over the world. And if anyone doesn't remember the movie Contagion, its claim to fame is that Gwyneth Paltrow died in like the first 7 minutes of the movie.
I never watched it, actually.
Oh, yeah. And then I remember sort of weeks passed and a colleague of mine went to New York City for like a pizza tour of Manhattan thing.
What a great idea.
Which was a great idea. But by the time he had come back, it hit New York hard. Yeah. You know, he was sort of the first person that I knew that had to quarantine, which the word quarantine really didn't mean anything to us then, but things were starting to get a little bit weird. And then a couple of things happened around March 14th. And I don't know if anyone else remembers March 14th being a significant day, but that was the day that, from my memory, they canceled Major League Baseball. And then Tom Hanks got COVID.
I remember Tom Hanks.
Oh,
not the baseball.
We were like, not Forrest Gump. Oh my God, what if he dies? You know, it was like wild that somebody that everybody knew got it because nobody knew anybody that had it then. So it was like sort of a big deal, right? So still resolute that we would go on this vacation, which we had planned for April the 9th. I purchased a pair of like old school, like those pilot goggles, you see those like where somebody's wearing like a leather bomber with a sheepskin collar and those.
I'm picturing it.
I got those goggles on Amazon, and JC was like, "What the hell are those for?" And I'm like, "For the plane. I'll wear them on the plane so that I don't get the droplets in my eyes." That's how much I was clinging to this idea.
That we were still going to go?
That we were still going to go. I looked like a perverse scuba diver trying to board an airplane.
In fairness, it was probably a really good seal.
I mean, it sealed well. Yeah. For Amazon. So by the third week of March, the world had entirely shifted on its axis. People were canceling work. People were working from home. I started to truthfully get excited. My husband started stockpiling supplies. We love a catastrophe at my house, as I'm sure people have come to understand about me. I had assumed, like almost all other workplaces, that my workplace would also be shut down. Not so. I learned that because we were a food company, specifically a seafood company, that we were going to remain open because food was an essential service. So my unexpectedly awesome exit strategy from a job that I was not that keen about, all of a sudden started to drift away. And, JC, whose, I would say, lungs aren't the best, blood pressure could maybe be better. He started to get nervous. He thought he would be one of those people that had, if they had contracted it, that they would get severely sick. So in his JC fashion, as only he could do, he said, "I'm putting my foot down." He said, "You go to work, don't come home."
Oh, I can hear that.
And I can't tell you how quickly I breathlessly agreed with him on that.
It's a good idea.
Yep. Yeah. So I asked for, and I did receive, a layoff. The vacation might have been dead. It was, unfortunately. We did get a full refund. Eventually. But I got to experience something that I never even dared to dream of, which was unlimited free time. Oh my God. To me, COVID was a gift. I live out in a rural area, and I have access to endless trails, beaches right where I live. So there's no feeling here of being penned in. Quite the opposite. We had just adopted a new dog, Lexi.
Oh, Lexi.
Our beloved Tico had passed away at 15 in late March. So we had adopted Lexi, who was 6 at the time. So happy to have found her forever home. So, I was walking her twice a day. I got in the best shape of my life. I learned to bake. I mean, I was baking, and not just like, banana breads. Like, I was making lemon meringue pies. I was making butter tarts. I was baking bread.
You were making butter tarts?
I did attempt butter tarts. It didn't go great, to be honest. It didn't really set. Nothing I did actually ever really set. It was all very liquidy at the end.
It's about the attempt, though.
Yeah, but I attempted it, and it was so much fun.
Did you do sourdough?
I didn't do sourdough. Sourdough terrifies me because it's like a living thing. I don't want like a mother living in my freezer. There's something weird about that to me.
It's a commitment.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to talk to me. I don't know. But I did bake really good, fresh bread. And I painted again. I got back into painting. I painted a couple of paintings. Honestly, I never wanted it to end. That's the honest truth. Every day felt like Christmas. I remember waking up in the morning and then remembering it was COVID and bounding out of bed. Like I just had all of this renewed energy because COVID combined two of my favorite things: free time, totally free of any stress, and constant and unabated news watching.
It does sound like the perfect environment for a Shannon.
It was Shannon's and I'm one of those people, some people get bored. I often heard people talking about during COVID that they were bored because they were staying at home all the time. That's my perfect scenario. To me, not having to go out, staying under a blanket for 12 straight hours and binge watching television is like my perfect scenario. So I I wasn't mad at it. The news became a sport that we engaged in daily. I remember that even if you didn't subscribe to CTV on your smart TV, they gave it to you anyway because of the importance of disseminating the information. So we watched daily the insanity unfold worldwide, always way, way worse seemingly in other countries than here in Canada. Canada did not have, at least at the beginning, the same rebellious spirit and appetite for mass death that other countries did. Looking at you, United States, in particular, looking at you, Florida. I remember my parents lived in Naples and they were aghast. Like, there was no mask wearing anywhere. They said people were just like, fuck it.
Well,
yeah. Crazy. And I remember watching fascinated as their states were depicted in like deeper red colors on the graphics on the map, meaning like most death. You know, remember those graphics?
I forgot about the infographics.
Yeah. There was a lot of them. Yeah. So highest death rates were spiking across mostly southern, mostly Republican states who were more invested in restarting the economy than protecting their populations from COVID. In Canada, we were aghast at these people. I couldn't imagine being in one of the hardest hit countries early on, like China or Italy or Spain got it really bad, where you heard these horror stories of bodies sort of piling up in like freezer trucks parked outside of hospitals. Remember all those stories?
I do. They were terrifying. And New York didn't fare much better either. New York City really struggled.
Yeah, especially at the beginning. Like what I refer to as like OG COVID.
Right.
Original COVID, it seems like there was a lot higher rates of people ending up in hospital, being put on ventilators, all of that stuff. So it was people being policed for their every movement. I was glued to some of that stuff, some of the big changes that were happening, you know, people's freedoms being taken away, you know, and I couldn't imagine that until it happened here. And we suddenly weren't allowed to leave our municipality anymore.
That was so bizarre.
Oh, and people were starting to revolt, you know. Once the government started to bring the hammer down on people, you know, and they couldn't go buy their groceries cheaper in Yarmouth. I remember the Facebook rants and all of the rules. There were so many rules to COVID. It's hard to go back there in my mind and remember all the bullshit that the government put us through to avoid essentially getting a cold. I mean, for most people, particularly in the last, you know, couple of years of the pandemic, that's what it was. It was a freaking cold. So it's interesting. You know, a lot of people died, and I have a lot of sympathy for people that were affected. But, and here's the but, in the end, it was our panic that was the thing that disrupted everybody's life, not the actual disease. Sure, if it was Ebola and half the people that got it died from it, the reaction that the world had towards COVID would have made sense. And we probably would have been more conciliatory towards the rules, but it wasn't. And only after climbing out of the nonsense years later have many of us come to side with the people that we all despised in the early days of the pandemic. It's interesting. We look at the anti-vaxxers, the freedom convoyers, and how we felt about them compared to how we feel about them now. And the media, because we're talking about news, played a huge role in essentially a con job. And we have to understand that they took advantage of this and that it incentivized the media to create a panic because it brought eyeballs to the news, and I think now, unfortunately, if another pandemic happened, the world would be a little wearier of what information they're willing to accept. For myself, I hope I'm more skeptical.
I wish I'd been more thoughtful about my judgment of the people who didn't follow the rules.
Right. And who didn't want to get a vaccine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
Hindsight.
Hindsight, I know, is 2020. Oh, and so was COVID. Sorry. So bad. So after 2 months of me being in my happy place, my happy COVID land of being off work, my boss called and was like, hey, it's time for you to return to work. So I begrudgingly agreed. I came back. And I was there for 4 days before promptly quitting. Because what COVID had given me was a glimpse into how I was supposed to be feeling and wasn't, which was happy. And once I got called back to work, I felt this intense sadness and rage, to be honest. It was rage. And I remember the day that I was meant to return, going out for a final walk in my cherished woods and sobbing. Big heaving tears, and thinking to myself, was this normal? I didn't think so. And it didn't seem right when I was back sitting in my office that first morning. And I realized, nope, this isn't right. A darkness had cascaded over and I couldn't ignore it. So I said, fuck it. And out of that, I found a much better job, at least for me, one that I enjoy a lot more. And with a team that I really, kind of thank God that happened. And whatever it is that causes you to make that decision, you should pay attention to yourself. And so I was glad that I did that and that things worked out how they were supposed to. And I don't know what it says about me that I turned COVID into a net positive. I guess it's just the luck of the draw and seeing opportunity, even in the bleakest of situations. For my siblings, and I have many, they were living in cities. They were working full-time, remotely with toddlers. So God bless those poor fucking people that had to do that for years. I honestly can't even imagine that. We were lucky here where we live. We didn't get hit the worst with the disease, certainly at the outset of the pandemic. When you're in a rural area, there's not a lot of shared space. We don't have escalators, elevators. We don't have public transportation. So, it doesn't spread the same way. There's no apartment buildings.
No congestion on the streets.
No, nothing like that. I mean, there's the grocery store.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Sorry, Anna.
It's okay. We've all tried to forget about that.
So, I mean, it took a long ass time for anyone here to actually even contract COVID. But once it did get here, it spread quickly and widely. I myself have had COVID 5 times.
Ooh.
Yeah. Never any worse than a mild cold, which again, is just luck of the draw.
Luck of the draw.
Yeah. So, what card did you draw in the COVID?
I don't think it was the happy card, Shannon.
Let's talk about Anna's experience with COVID.
In a word, humbling. In every possible way. Yeah. I really didn't have a good time during COVID. And I don't know whether COVID was sort of the catalyst for all of these changes that were about to happen in my life that I had no idea were coming down the pipeline, or if it just ran in tandem with it. I'm really not sure. But at that point in time, so March of 2020, I was about 3 months in to a new role in my career, one that I had worked diligently towards for about 20 years.
Wow.
And I was so excited to have this opportunity. So I'm navigating the sale of this property and trying to ascertain the expectations of my new owners. On top of that, I'm leading a team of 150 people and feeling, relatively ill-equipped to do so in the midst of all of these new things coming at us. So I do remember the 14th, 15th. It was the 15th, right? The Ides of March.
The Ides of March. Yep.
Yeah. And we were in the office. And I remember looking at coworkers going, I don't think we're supposed to be here. Like you were really breaking the rules. Like, I think we need to leave.
I think we're in danger.
Yeah. We better go home. And so we did go home, right? And we did follow the rules. And we washed groceries as they came in the door.
I totally wash groceries in lemon juice.
Lemon juice? Oh, yeah. I think I used something a little stronger and more caustic, probably doing more damage than the COVID would have done.
Well, at least you didn't drink the bleach.
I did not drink
You didn't
the
follow
bleach.
what Trump said.
No. But not everybody followed the rules, like you were saying, and those people were denied any number of freedoms that I think were disguised as privileges. But maybe were rights, Anyway, I think what scared me the most in hindsight was just how easily we followed the rules. All in the name of being a good citizen and a good neighbor. But do you remember how quickly that shifted to, fear your neighbor and call the cops on your neighbor if there's a car in their driveway that doesn't belong there?
Or it was the Salem witch trials.
It just devolved into this madness. But anyway, so back to the early days. So I'm leading a team. You're trying to find strategic ways to make money and save losses and keep people calm and optimistic that things are going to be okay. And I remember that being really overwhelming. And for me, as someone, as you know, who prefers to stay away from the news, it was a constant onslaught. It was too much. And it changed every day and nothing made sense.
Nothing made sense.
It was chaos. So as I'm managing the expectations that I'm finding myself in this new role, it becomes increasingly clear that I am up against this just insurmountable obstacle. Because it really had nothing to do with the work that I was doing or the faith that I had in my abilities, because I had plenty. But this obstacle wound up culminating in my choice to leave a 20-year career in the middle of a pandemic with absolutely no plan B. And the day drinking and the Netflix binge watching and all the while, I think with this sort of mask to the public and to my friends saying, this is great. I've got my first summer off since I was 13 years old. This is going to be fantastic.
I remember being jealous of you.
Well, don't be.
You weren't having the best time.
I wasn't having the best time at all. So I guess on the flip side of that, I didn't have it the worst. I have immense respect for anyone who is caught on the front lines, especially in healthcare, for anybody working in the service industry or any role that you just couldn't escape being what was the term? Oh, an essential worker.
An essential worker.
An essential worker.
Yep.
Yeah. Like a grocery store cashier making $14.35 an hour.
That's right.
Essential.
They were essential.
Absolutely.
Not CEOs.
No. They could easily work from home.
They could work from anywhere.
But, working with the public during those early days, for many of us who were doing it, felt really important or brave.
Right.
And regardless of your discipline. So, whatever it was, if you were out there, you were risking yourself and your family. So I walked away from a job that I loved so much more than I hated. But I came to find out that it was also my identity. And has taken a really long time to try to claw that back and find out who I am outside of that work that I had and loved so much. So I guess the pandemic made me more solitary, a bit of a drunk. And, eventually, though, we got mildly ill. We didn't have any close connections to anybody who had this really shitty COVID fuckery happen to them. We were really lucky.
Yeah.
And it became really easy to be complacent about it. But that first year, what a fucking trip.
Oh, God.
You mentioned the Freedom Convoy and the toilet paper shortages. You remember those?
Did I tell you that I accidentally joined a Freedom Convoy?
No.
Oh, yeah. So I was
You jumped in the wrong truck? What?
Well, no, JC had dropped me off at one of our staff residences in Yarmouth to deliver them supplies because they had COVID. So you had to bring them food and supplies so that they could stay isolated in their rooms. Anyways, and so I leave the house. I knew that just by being in that house, I had just contracted COVID for the first time. You know, when you just feel it, you're like, something just goes down the back of your throat. And anyway, so I was like thinking about that. And then I jumped in the truck and JC and I drove down the road and we took a left onto the main street in Yarmouth. And we were sitting there and like, why are all the cars going so slow? And then we were looking next to us and I was like, why are all these people waving flags? And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, honey, we're in the parade. He's like, what parade? I'm like, the Freedom Convoy. He's like, what? I'm in my work truck.
Oh, what a time to be alive.
And I mean, it was 20 minutes. Like we had to do the whole thing. You couldn't turn back.
But it's crazy though, isn't it? And I think you had mentioned, it was the word quarantine, right? That
quarantine
was so foreign. I mean, it makes me think of like the Black Plague.
Right, totally.
I mean, that's
totally, yeah.
And here we are.
And I remember the people that were like stuck on cruise ships?
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember that? And they were all getting it because, of course, the ventilation systems.
Oh, yeah.
And like,
worse than norovirus on a cruise ship is COVID, evidently. Oh, yeah. The only thing missing was aliens, Jen.
That
was it.
That
was
it.
all.
Oh, God. Well, they were there.
They were there.
They were waiting in the ocean.
Yeah. So all that to say, COVID sucked for me. In hindsight, maybe I'm building a better Anna. Okay. But at the time, it was not a walk in the park.
Oh, what a trip down memory lane.
Absolutely. So this next subject travels back in time about 25 years, speaking about big news stories that sort of shaped the collective. 9/11.
Holy.
Mm-hmm. Where were you?
Well, 9/11 happened to be my 21st birthday. And so I remember I was living in Montreal. I was a student of McGill. I woke up hungover at around 11 because it was my birthday. And I had a foggy memory waking up of running around some neighborhood in Montreal without shoes on the night before.
That's about right.
Yeah. Having inexplicably fled a party given in my honor. See episode 1 on sobriety for backstory there. Anyways, there was somebody knocking on the door in the main floor apartment that I shared with a couple of roommates in the plateau. And I opened the door and this girl that I kind of barely knew stood there crying, like sobbing, asking for my roommate. And I remember her saying like, it's horrible. And she was like gasping. And I couldn't really surmise what the hell she was talking about. To me, it sounded insane. So apparently planes were flying into buildings in New York City and no one knew what was going on. So she left and I, briefly thought maybe it was a mild hallucination. I kind of slowly shuffled into our living room and turned on the TV. And I remember standing there holding the clicker and watching as they showed news clips of planes flying into very tall buildings, just as she had described. I sunk down on the floor, not really grasping what I was seeing. I'd been to New York. I knew those buildings. Those were the trade towers. And they were billowing smoke. And then suddenly they crumpled into a mass of smoke. And I just thought, all those people, you know. And people were running around New York everywhere, panicking. And I remember I had a really close friend that had left Montreal to go to art school in downtown Manhattan, not far from where the trade towers were. And I just thought, fuck. I called all my friends. That day we waited for more planes to hit. And I remember that feeling of like, what's next? It was the towers and then the Pentagon. And then finally some plane that was meant for the White House went down in some random field in Pennsylvania. Remember that?
I do.
Yeah. And then we learned later that some very, very heroic passengers had wrestled the plane from the hands of terrorists at the last moment. imagine if it had taken out the White House. We all met at a friend of mine's apartment, and we made one of those box cakes because, as mentioned earlier, it was my 21st birthday.
Which you've likely never celebrated the same since then.
No. I have a good friend of mine who every birthday he texts me, "Happy birthday, darkest day in history."
Oh, shit.
And I'm not sure if he means because I was born or because of 9/11.
Just a little levity.
Pretty sure it's the latter. Yeah. Anyways, we basically waited to hear from my friend all day, who, her girlfriend was at my best friend's place, and she finally called. And I remember her screaming with relief when she finally got through. She had to walk over the bridge into Brooklyn to make a phone call. And I remember we all met at a bar that night, my university friends, and we drank pitchers of beer and we ate popcorn and we sat there stunned. And I got my tragus pierced that night. I felt I needed to mark the day somehow. And someone suggested
piercing.
No, I had to take it out. JC actually had to take it out with a pair of needle nose pliers because I wasn't allowed in the fish plant with it in. Yeah, it's another story for another day.
Another day.
But, I remember I was in university, and in university, we're kind of in that sort of idealistic, learning about history and how everything kind of comes together. And somebody had suggested that everything was different. But it felt almost insensitive at the time to speculate on what it all meant. And our unformed brains could only make personal connections, but the world did not feel the same. That day, to me, that's what I remember, is that the world that I knew was not the same after that event. Somebody had pierced through the barricade of the West's unflappable security right at its very heart. And, a lot of people will say, well, Washington's in its heart, but I think the real heart of the West is New York, to be honest. All we could do was watch as long dormant feelings seemed to sort of rise instantaneously from the Western populace. And I remember that right away. Patriotism sort of bubbled up out of nowhere.
Instantaneously, too.
Instant. Rage, incredulity, the need for vengeance. And I remember, if you listen to Joe Biden and the warning that he gave before Netanyahu went in and attacked civilians in Gaza, he said, don't be blinded so much by your vengeance that you do the wrong thing. Because if you think about what had happened as a result of 9/11, they ended up in a war in Afghanistan for basically 20 years. A war that was unwinnable and they didn't win. They went into Iraq. So there was a lot of things that were as a result of that, that have changed not only the way that we think about our own security, but the way that the world thinks about us. So, every year on my birthday, I am reminded of the events of 9/11. I know my birthday is coming when I start seeing news promos for documentaries like 9/11, Where Are They Now? 9/11, 10 years later, etc. And I remember I drove through New York not long after it actually happened. I think it was in 2002. And I remember it was nighttime and they had two gigantic beams of light that shone into the sky where the trade towers would have been.
I thought it was actually quite a beautiful tribute.
It was, yeah. But it was haunting.
Oh,
too.
Unquestionably.
I mean, it was like 2,000 souls screaming into the black sky. I've never seen anything like that. And always the people I thought of the most were the ones that were on the upper floors that day and decided with no way to get down, they were above where the planes had hit, that they jumped instead of burning alive. There are pictures of them that probably should never have been published, but I found them because I'm a terrible person and looked at them, hoping that I would have been brave enough to make that same choice. Context, just like the steel in those two towers, melts away when you are staring down over 100 floors and leaping to your death. Does it matter at that point? So the news plays a big role in how we think about 9/11, how it's memorialized, how it's pimped to the public. Like mentioned, the people of Gaza have experienced 20 times the amount of casualties since the conflict began a year ago. Ukraine and Russia have amassed probably 250,000 casualties, not to mention how many people have lost their lives in Afghanistan, Iraq, after the wars that directly followed 9/11. Vengeance has its price, and usually it's a lot more expensive. What we often see but never discussed is that American lives on American soil are valued much higher. And that seems to be the unspoken thought that permeates the discussion about 9/11. And not that I would ever say that those people weren't victims of a horrendous crime, but it bears thinking about. That's why people hate us in the West. And I can't necessarily say it that I blame them. If the shoe were on the other foot, maybe I'd be a terrorist. Who knows? If I was on the wrong end of U.S. foreign policy, I'd probably feel very similar resentment and incredulity. So what we lose when we engage in these conflicts is that we are more similar than we are different. And that's what they try to batter out of us. But it's important to remember that. I mean, it's heavy.
It is heavy.
Yeah.
And I when we were writing this, I found it really hard to think back 25 years.
Yeah.
Not recognizing it has been that long.
Right.
And I remember that day. I slept in that morning and I got up with only enough time to grab a quick shower before my afternoon shift. And at that time, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. I was living in a deconsecrated church with no running water. Story for another time, but
I mean,
why not? Right?
One of my favorite facts about Anna is the many lives and adventures she has lived.
So I often stayed overnight in the on-site housing at work due to this and the often short turnaround time that I had between shifts. So, I'm not sure if I'm imagining or misremembering that it was quiet and serious when I walked into work that day, but something was definitely not right. So pretty quickly, my manager, Denise, she asked if I had watched the news yet, and I told her I hadn't, though I'm guessing that was fairly obvious. I then got a quick debrief, like you said, about planes. Hitting a building in New York. And I remember thinking that was just impossible. And the fact that it wasn't an accident. So she sent me to her apartment to catch up, I guess. And I'm sure I must have talked to my family on the phone, but I don't remember doing that at all. But I'm sure I must have. I turned on CNN. The towers had fallen, but the images of the planes hitting the Trade Center ran on a loop, along with the chaos in the streets and the smoking wreckage in Arlington. And I returned to my post. Within the hour, I would say, helping guests with travel plans, inviting them into our offices, sharing our computers and phones as people tried to connect with their loved ones. It was all very heavy. The day and night was a blur. I remember getting home and sitting in front of the TV with my dog, Kofsky. Kofsky. That's also a story for another time. But images of George W. reading to a classroom of children, and Giuliani giving media briefings, and grounded fleets of airplanes and clouds of dust and smoke cascading through streets like a tsunami. Mm. I was 23 at the time. I hadn't yet visited New York City or truly traveled much at all. My only tie to the city at that time was my knowledge of the pop culture juggernaut that it was. And if you didn't know that this was real life, those images we were seeing could have just been another blockbuster movie, but it was real life. And the systematic destruction of these sort of American symbols of power sounds like it could just as easily be fiction. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I visited NYC for the first time in 2018. I rode the elevator to the top of the One World Tower. I stood with all the other tourists around the memorial at Ground Zero, reading the names etched into the stonework. The following day, we visited a tenement museum in the Lower East Side that told the story of immigrants, migrants, and refugees from the 1860s through the 1980s. This great coming to America story of hope for a better life. And it was at that moment, nearly 2 decades later, standing in a replica tenement from the 1950s, that the magnitude of 9/11 hit me, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next big news story that we want to talk about might not have been a massive news story on a global scale, but certainly it's the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history. And for those of us that were living in Nova Scotia at the time, it was a story that stayed with most of us for a really long time after it happened.
And still does.
And still does.
Yeah.
So we definitely wanted to talk about the Nova Scotia Mass Shooting. So, yeah, Anna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I knew that this podcast topic in general was going to be one that pushed me outside my comfort zone. And truly, that's exactly what I wanted. But I'm not sure that I was prepared for what that might dredge up in my poor little psyche, or just how much I would procrastinate about sitting down to write some of the answers to the questions we developed. This question specifically gave me a great deal of trouble because I didn't know what I wanted to say about it, and I was and am apprehensive about getting into the headspace where I can think about it.
Right.
But I remember it clearly. It was Sunday, April 19th, 2020. It was mid-morning when the news broke, and I recall my sister and I exchanging worried texts as his commandeered vehicle got ever nearer her hometown. And we watched in real time videos of burning police cars, one of which was a replica that he had restored and then used to terrorize a community. For days, maybe weeks afterwards, I consumed every version of media possible on the subject. So much, so many images and stories and victims. And like Alan Legier years earlier, way too close to home. The news media even refused to use his name. I kept imagining what it must have been like to be pulled over by what you expect as a uniformed officer, only to be shot by a madman dressed like a policeman, driving a very convincing replica of a police car. Or you're just out taking your morning walk like you do every day and you wind up being gunned down on the side of the road. 23 people dead? 22? 23? Mm-hmm. I had nightmares and I cried and I drank way too much. And I was already drinking too much because it was the pandemic. Let's not forget.
Right. Yes, this was right at the beginning of COVID.
Yeah. And I remember the stark image of a flight path in the shape of a heart stretching over the 100 kilometers and 16 crime scenes. It was sort of one pilot's attempt to share in this collective grief that we were all feeling. And all of this happening, as I said, amidst the very new reality of the unfolding pandemic restrictions on contact, work, and travel. So people lit candles and grieved in isolation because they couldn't even hug each other. So this now infamous hashtag Nova Scotia Strong was trending en masse, and we all tried in our own ways to express how devastating this all was for the victims, for their families, and for all Nova Scotians. I remember having to give a Zoom interview to a local news channel from my kitchen table to talk about how our team at work chose to show our own support. And a drone image captured the image of a giant heart and the words Nova Scotia Strong that the grounds team had mowed into our property's golf course. I don't remember what I said during the interview, but I remember how wrong it all felt to me. I mean, I know it came from a good place, but it felt almost glorified. Yeah, like we had jumped on some terribly disturbed bandwagon. That was tough. I remember knowing I had to do it and really having a hard time reconciling it.
You did a great job, though. Yeah, you handled it really well. Yeah.
So this marked a point in time where, for my own sanity, I actively tuned out all news media except what I absolutely had to consume to stay on top of my work. I mean, I was pretty tuned out already, but this took my almost rebellious disinterest to a new level. And I haven't given myself permission to think about it since then, if I'm being honest.
Right.
Yeah. So this was the question I procrastinated about most. And I sat down earlier this week with the intent of reading through the Mass Casualty Commission report, the public inquiry that was published almost 3 years after the mass shootings. Each page of the document prefaced by a warning of sensitive material and a link to wellness supports. I looked at headlines for articles containing scathing reviews of how the RCMP handled the situation and their failure to warn the public about the danger they were in. And you know what, Shannon? I decided not to read them.
Good for you.
Yeah, I really couldn't do it. And I promise I'm okay to listen to your rendition of theories or research on the topic and its aftermath, but I just could not dive back in. I mean, there are just so many dangerous ideas in this story.
Giddy up.
Giddy up.
Because one of the terrible things about the mass shooting for a province like Nova Scotia, where we are basically one big community of interconnected, small rural communities outside of Halifax.
Help your neighbor, leave your doors unlocked.
Yep.
Yeah.
And everybody knew somebody that was a victim or was personally connected to it in some way. So, I mean, it was absolutely horrifying. Yeah. So for me, I remember it. It was a Sunday morning. it was kind of hard to remember what day it was because we were home during COVID. And so the days of the week had ceased to mean anything. But I remember that morning because JC and I were in the living room and we were on our phones laying around. It was around 9 a.m. And JC had saw someone had shared on Facebook some Twitter post from the RCMP saying there was a firearms complaint outside of Truro. And the firearms complaint then had escalated into an active shooter. And then the active shooter on the run heading south on the highway. And I don't remember when that day it came to light that he was in a replica RCMP cruiser. We're going to go into that in a little bit. But it was very, very close to the time that he was put down in a hail of bullets in a gas station in Enfield. And he had made it about an hour south on the highway. And we were hooked on this from the start. You don't see crimes like this every day, especially around here. And every new detail that emerged was crazier than the last. We'd heard that there was some fires in Portapique, but could not have prepared ourselves that basically an entire community of homes were burnt down that night, that 22 people were murdered in a 13-hour spree, 22 people and one unborn child. And then Gabriel Wortman went on between the night of April 18th and the morning of April 19th on a crime spree that was the worst in the history of this country. Innocent, unsuspecting people that were just going about their lives. Like you said, out for a morning walk, driving down the road, in their homes.
Just the most unsuspecting of activities that you do every day.
I think that was the most enraging part of it. There was one where he had stopped to see, like one of the victims had stopped his car to see if he could help because he saw that it was a policeman. So as more and more information came out, it obviously got worse and worse. The whole province was in a collective state of shock. It was not a disorganized killer. This was a cold, calculating, and methodical and seemingly well planned out attack.
Yeah.
He was prepared. He was definitely better prepared than the RCMP, who, with all due respect, because I am not in law enforcement and I do not know what goes into trying to operate in a situation like this where there's so many moving parts. But as a member of the public that they are paid to protect, do I feel like we were not given the information that was pertinent at the time? Yeah, I do. And I'll start by, before I go into any details on this, saying that some of the things I'm going to talk about are things that are known facts. Some of the things I'm going to talk about are my own theories taken from things that I have read that I am not presenting here today as fact. And so if you do have some sensitivities towards this subject, this might be a segment that you skip. But I certainly don't want to offend anyone, but we're talking about news, and this is how I approach news. So there was an RCMP tweet with a photo of Wortman's replica police car that was posted at 10:17 a.m., more than 12 hours after Jamie Blair told police about the fake cop car. So that was the first point that I found personally enraging.
And I assume that was an act of self-protection. You didn't want a free-for-all on cops. Was that basically it?
I mean, they didn't want open season on cops.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how those families felt as they waited, in some cases, 8, 9, 10 hours without hearing from their family members that they were dead. But eventually it all had to come out. And if you remember, it came out very, very slowly. Yeah. There was so many different crime scenes along his path that it did take a really long time for them to sort of get a handle on the scale of this thing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, to me, when you study the timeline, it's astonishing to understand that the RCMP spent 11 hours chasing their tails trying to locate the shooter in Portapique when he had left just before 11 p.m. on the night of April 18th. So on the 19th, it was 9:40 a.m. that the RCMP fully grasped that Wortman had escaped Portapique. and was still killing people while driving a replica cruiser, according to the report that the inquiry came out with. So 9:40 a.m., that's when they grasp it. 11 p.m. the night before, that's when he left. Yep. By then, he'd already killed 4 more people. He would go on to kill another 4 people after that time marker, 9:40 a.m., including an RCMP officer, a woman who heroically died in the service of trying to protect people. And what they were all supposed to be doing, but clearly were not prepared for this level of a crime. And I mean, in rural Nova Scotia, this is a 1 in a million that something like that would happen there. But you would think that there would be some level of organization that would be in charge of disseminating information and having the right people at the job in the right time. I don't know when I pieced it together in my mind that they held that detail back because he was driving a replica RCMP cruiser to protect themselves against the possibility that people would then go after RCMP officers in real RCMP cruisers. I was enraged by it, but understood. But it also piqued my curiosity. Who the fuck was this guy? That was to me, and I know we're not supposed to focus on the killer in these situations, but I couldn't help myself. It was so massive and seemingly so well thought out that it to me, it wasn't like what you see in normal mass shootings where somebody, goes in and shoots as many people as they can in a short amount of time and then they're immediately put down by the police. This wasn't that.
No.
He clearly had it out for the RCMP. So we, of course, despise him. As well. Of course we do. He is the killer. He is responsible, but he's also dead. So not much we can do with any anger towards him. So I kind of moved from anger into inquiry.
But that's how you navigate most things. So that really shouldn't come as a surprise.
I was like, well, let's try to figure this one out. This is a puzzle I need to put together. And at the time, it was sort of maddening to try to gain information from traditional media, especially because the media in Canada is mostly the CBC, which is government funded and therefore biased towards representing the RCMP in a positive light. Also more likely to hold back information that says otherwise, I would say. I think that's a fair assessment. There was also a big lack of well-funded investigative journalism, and there just is in general a lack of that. So most of the coverage was, talking about the failures of the RCMP to credit some other members of the mainstream media, including Global and CTV, talking about victims, of course, and then talking about domestic violence and the domestic violence suffered by the killer's partner, Lisa Banfield. Very little was spent on figuring out what his motivations were. And to me, it was way too quiet there. There was scant information, but the information that did exist was extremely suspicious. He had met with an RCMP officer up to 16 times in the period before the killings happened. He had also crossed the border into Maine 15 times in the 2 years before the killings took place. He had connections both to the criminal underworld, especially, bikers, and the RCMP was well known to both. So that's not your everyday fella.
Not your everyday denturist.
Yeah, no, that seemed to me an interesting little factoid. He had a lot of connections in New Brunswick, where he was from. So I started reading Frank magazine at this time, because that seemed to be the only thing that I could find online that was actually trying to dig into the mystery of,
his
why this guy had done what he did. And there was a very well-known journalist named Paul Palango that had, basically retired to Nova Scotia to sell antiques or blown glass or something in Chester with him and his wife. And then this happened. He was from, he used to write for the Globe, and then like the biggest story ever dropped in this guy's lap. So he went back to work. I'm thankful he did. He was a longtime critic of the RCMP. So, he had done a lot of news stories about them. He had sources. And I think we were lucky to have him here in Nova Scotia. I scoured every article he wrote. Frank at that time was behind a paywall, and I paid for Frank. I wanted to read this. I wanted to subscribe, and I eventually bought his book, which was 22 Murders. And although the conclusion he made could not be definitively laid out, to me, in my conspiracy brain, there was a few things that he was alluding to that I found very interesting. And I sort of pieced together those
the breadcrumbs.
The little breadcrumbs. Again, I am from the nation of TikTok. And I pieced together what to me sounded like the story behind the story. So I'm going to lay it out for you, but I'm just going to preface this. Please don't sue us. This is just what I surmise, and it is not based on fact, and it is my opinion for entertainment purposes only. Here we go.
All right, let's hear it, Chin.
Wortman was an RCMP informant. Now, the inquiry showed and came to the conclusion that he wasn't, but I'm pretty sure that they're allowed to lie about that. So they have the legal right to hide the identity of informants. So in my opinion, he was a fucking informant. That's just me. Also, long ties to organized crime. Very strange relationship he had with a disgraced lawyer named Tom Evans from New Brunswick, who kind of to me seemed like he acted like an ersatz father figure to him. There was a few wild news stories about Evans that you could find in sort of the research. So 1987, Evans was convicted on one count of unlawful use of a firearm without reasonable precaution and given a 1-year suspended sentence with 1-year probation and a firearms ban. Court records show, according to the evidence from the trial, Evans and 2 British soldiers stationed near Canadian Forces Base Gagetown were caught firing weapons in the direction of a Bible camp while operating a 16-foot aluminum boat.
I see.
So this is Tom Evans. 1989, he defended a Colombian cartel member who was part of a group of 5 accused of orchestrating a prison break. They had come to New Brunswick to free 2 fellow gangsters who were jailed after crashing a plane filled with cocaine into a snowy field near a remote airstrip just outside of Fredericton. Reading reports from the time say police estimated that the drugs had a street value of $250 million.
Holy shit.
So Evans was by way of being a criminal lawyer, an eccentric, had some interesting friends. In 1990, he was suspended from the Law Society after he was charged with sexually assaulting an underage boys and plying him with liquor. So that's just, what I could find from a few news stories about Tom Evans. And this was a guy that was very, very, very close to Gabriel Wortman in the time that he was alive. I have a feeling that Gabriel Wortman might have been groomed by Evans. This is my theory, not fact. Potentially even abused by him. I also can surmise that though through Evans, Wortman might have been introduced to some unsavory characters. And eventually he made potentially large sums of money running guns, bombs, cigarettes, drugs across the border from the U.S., and then selling them to various, organized crime syndicates over here in Canada. I think eventually he got in with the RCMP as an insurance policy against getting into trouble and started playing both sides. In the years leading up to the mass shooting, I think he was potentially specifically involved with the operation in Atlantic Canada that will go unnamed, but I know that there is some reports, especially in Paul Palango's book, that there was an RCMP handler in New Brunswick that was so beside himself with panic on what they had gotten into bed with Wortman that he had committed suicide 18 months before the shooting took place. Another thing that I sort of gathered from this is that about 3 weeks before the murders, they closed the operation, meaning that presumably Wortman would have lost his protection or his status via informant status with the RCMP. And with the border shutting down due to COVID, his other main source of income was also lost. So I think he panicked. I think he was attempting to liquidate assets, perhaps escape, but now was a caged bird with the pandemic making travel out of the country a challenge. He'd been flagged by the CBSA for the shit they'd found in one of his last trips across the border from Maine. I believe they might have even pulled his nexus status.
Ooh.
And I think he was probably feeling like a trapped animal. And like any narcissist, was looking for somebody to blame. And I think he landed on the RCMP. Now, again, can't emphasize this enough. This is a conspiracy theory, folks. But based on some of the things that I've read, to me, in my conspiracy brain, this makes sense. This makes sense out of what to me is a senseless crime.
We are not so far removed from these things as we think we are here.
Right.
And I think that was part of what made this so sad and terrifying.
Yeah.
Was that you couldn't pretend.
Yeah. Because we all thought, like, what if something like that happened in our community? We'd never be the same.
No.
And to those people that were the victims of this, they had nothing to do with any of this BS, regardless of what caused it. They were good people going about their lives, doing the best that they could in a really hard time anyway.
And many of them just wrong place at the wrong time.
Wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah, unreal.
But I think you're right, Shannon. For those of us who live in this geographic area, there's been a whole lot of horrific news stories that have touched us all. But for a lot of us, this was the one.
Yeah.
This, I know for me, I've had a hard time revisiting it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I appreciate your thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if they're helpful, but I think it highlights how you and me approach this differently. And for me, if I can solve the caper, even if nothing is ever going to come to pass with it, at least I can feel like I've made sense out of something that to me is so senseless. But it doesn't bring those people back. And even if that is what happened, he's still a horrible fucking human being. So the final question, to sort of wrap all of this together, where do you locate yourself in history?
I always believed I was born at the wrong time. Maybe it's my love of 60s Britpop or the way I was raised, but I feel like I belong in a much slower time, a less global time. And I suspect the way I navigate the world reflects that, both intrigued and terrified by all the shiny things. So I don't know if I do locate myself in history. In fact, I really struggled with this question. I think I actually asked you, I was like, what do you mean by this? I can't tell you how many Google searches I did trying to find an angle or perspective that would give voice to how I feel about my place in the world. And I guess I often feel a bit like a time traveler who just got stuck here and hasn't quite figured out how to navigate it yet.
Don't we all?
What the fuck is this? So the questions that we've answered in this episode shed light on where and how I locate myself, I suppose, though. And I mean, I definitely identify with the adaptable, self-reliant, and somewhat cynical characteristics of my Gen X and Xennial counterparts. But there's also some inherited boomer traits in there with a penchant for counterculture rebellion mixed with the rigidity of being a workaholic, just below the surface that I can't quite dismiss.
I mean, big of you to admit it.
Well, thanks. I think the overarching sentiment I take away from it is that dichotomy between a life before and after significant changes in technology, though, that our generation and that of our parents have experienced. The fact that I've referenced a Google search to help me answer this question kind of says it all. Like, God, do I even know how to think anymore? I don't know. I almost long for a return to a time, where one needed a library card, a set of encyclopedias, and a thesaurus to get by, where we needed conversation, debate, and research to learn about other perspectives and help shape our own. And I mean, this is all still true, don't get me wrong. But the sheer amount of information at our fingertips is overwhelming and dangerous sometimes. And because for so many of us, our once trusted institutions and ideologies have let us down, we have to be way more savvy, more critical, and more careful than ever before. And it's absolutely exhausting. It's like the world has demanded that we must now all be experts on all the subjects. Go ahead, learn, look, it's all right here, you idiot.
Do your research.
Do better. Do better. I feel like a fucking squirrel half the time, honestly, except nuts are just ideas and I'm bounding from one thing to another, hiding it away to consider later.
I mean, can you scan your research? Is that okay?
Sure, it's fine.
Do I need to deep dive everything? Who's got the time for that? We all have to work full time.
Especially when I'm time traveling.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's where I locate myself.
That's right.
Another dimension.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, then you're ahead of the game, not behind.
Well, I don't know about that. But what about you? Where do you locate yourself in history?
To me, it's like a two-parter. So I look at number one, like my origins. So the 20 years, between when I was born and when I would or society would consider me to be an adult so for me, between 1980 and the year 2000s, right. That's what I consider to be like my origin. So that to me is easy. I definitely consider myself to be Generation X. Like you have said, I do not consider myself a millennial. No. My husband is a millennial. He was born in 1981. I take the time period very seriously. 62 to 80 is Gen X. I'm the youngest of the Gen Xers, but I still fall into that generation. Don't take it away from me.
I won't.
Millennials are whiny bitches. Anyway, latchkey generation, the come home when it's dark generation, the children are to be seen and not heard generation, which I heard constantly because I was raised by Irish parents, generation raised by television. I could probably name for you most of the characters in 80s sitcoms and sing you all of the songs. I mean, I feel like we were the lucky ones. We were raised before the advent of the internet. Heaven forbid, before the advent of social media. Oh my God. Can you imagine if we had Instagram and Facebook in high school?
No.
Like you said, the ones that knew how to use a Dewey Decimal System, right? We know how to use a library. Nobody knows how to use a library anymore. They don't need to, kind of like writing in cursive, but I know how to look things up. Generation that met our significant others in bars the way that it should be. I grew up on grunge music, authenticity, not the BS resurgence of pop stars that happened in the late 90s. Sorry, Brittany. Not the materialism of the millennials. My work ethic, kind of like you, is a Gen X work ethic. I took my job seriously. I did not expect credit or reassurance, just a paycheck. I am skeptical of everything except conspiracy theories. All of those I believe. But, especially authority and very especially politicians and caps, which is pure Gen X. Yeah. So if I take a wider lens that's not so autobiographical of this period in history, I guess I would say that the period from 1980 to 2000, it was a time of globalization, peace, prosperity, for the Western industrial nations anyway. Economically, we were in sort of peak capitalism. Politically, democracy was being paraded as an ideal system of governance espoused by the Western world. The industrializing nations, particularly in Asia, were sort of clamoring to catch up. American culture was the dominant culture. Consumerism was growing explosively. Manufacturing sort of got offshored to developing countries so that we could have all of the cheap goods that we desired faster. And as each country that was sort of buying into this globalization and trade, they wanted the spoils of the culture that they were constantly being advertised to. So they wanted their McDonald's and their Coca-Cola and their Nikes. And we invented the internet, not me personally. I don't even know what those zeros and ones are for, Anna. But, everybody became connected. Knowledge was at our fingertips. It was a new world with endless possibilities. So that's how I look at myself and where I fell in history. But present day, okay. So then, just before year 2000, and a lot of people will say 9/11.
9/11, yeah.
But for me, it actually was Columbine. It was 1999. And when Columbine happened, that is the day I think my innocence and optimism died.
Yeah, that was another one we didn't dive into.
No.
But that was...
that's to me was the canary in the coal mine. So Columbine happens in 99. September 11th happens in 2001. .com bubble bursts. War in Afghanistan and Iraq. Financial crisis in 2008 happened. Remember the housing bubble? We invented social media and dating apps, and everyone got more connected and more isolated and depressed. Just saying, meat and bars. Trump won inexplicably the 2016 election. And then we all understood that people were still really racist. The pandemic happened, and then we realized that the world could stop at any moment and our freedom and rights could be taken away. The earth started to fight back against humans' abuses with wildfires and floods and tornadoes and hurricanes that kill lots of people. Russia invaded Ukraine. Israel, ironically, committed a genocide. Trump again. Aliens, Anna?
Aliens.
Did we talk about the fact that there's fucking aliens?
In the water.
Robots? I think we're fucked. That's, excuse my language, but no one really talks about it because facing what's actually happening is too scary. So we kind of just go on like the world is fine. Or maybe it's always how fucked it's been.
I feel like that's the case. It's just the goalposts move, what it is that's making it fucked changes. But it's legitimately fucked.
It's like, were we born in a rare bubble of peace from 1980 to 2000? Or was I just not paying attention?
Maybe we just weren't paying attention.
We
had the end of the Cold War. We had Berlin Wall. We had the AIDS epidemic. We had, there was a lot of things in there.
It's true. Maybe it was just always
But we were
up.
listening to New Kids on the Block. Step 1, we had lots of fun.
Step 2, so much we could do.
But we did none of it, and here we are.
I was going to keep going. Just saying. So I think maybe we're just unprepared for this insanity. And I think the interesting part of our modern day dilemma is that we can't locate ourselves in the context of history because we are now struggling to figure out what is true and what is not true about our present day context. So this is where it kind of loops around.
Well, I think you hit it on the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
What can we trust?
Right. We part of the problem is that people have lost faith in the traditional news institutions that used to be a function, an extraordinarily important function of a free and fair society. So the news existed to hold people in power accountable. But then the news got bought by the very people it was supposed to be reporting on. And in the Trump era, we look at the mainstream press as corrupted, vehicle for the deep state, if we're to listen to him, and for the status quo. And so once he takes power, T-7 days and counting, he's going to go after traditional news outlets that went after him. And you can make the argument that this is what typical authoritarian fascist dictator would do. But you can also make the argument that he is absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's what's scary. I can make both of those arguments.
Make absolute sense.
Yep. So the world is very polarized, and we now receive our news through atypical sources that are governed by algorithms that are designed to feed us our own viewpoint because it creates better engagement. Right? So people's views are then continually strengthened and never challenged, and thus they get more and more angry from a lack of understanding of any issue from 360 degrees. And it's really only when you can take both sides of an argument that you've understood it. And that's part of the power of your relationship to the news. Even though you are ambivalent, you definitely like to see an argument from all sides.
I absolutely do.
A fairness, right? And that is one element that is absolutely missing in our modern day news. Because nobody fucking bothers because they're too pissed off and don't realize that their anger is a manufactured product of the information they are consuming.
And oftentimes just giving more power to that which they despise.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's creating derision, gridlock in our society. And the funny part is we don't even know if we're doing it on purpose. So how do we locate ourselves in this context? The short answer is that we fucking don't.
It was a trick question, Shannon. I knew I
I mean, I'll just digress for a second and say there's a lot of people right now that say that one of the reasons that Trump did so well in the most recent U.S. election is that he went and did that interview on the Joe Rogan podcast. Yeah. And I mean, isn't that incredible? Is that people have gone so far away from mainstream media now. They're going to non-traditional sources like podcasts. Donald Trump, you're welcome here anytime, by the way. I'll talk to you. No problem. I'll do my research if you do. But, so Joe Rogan, he's the most popular podcast, has been for a long time. And it's interesting. It's also interesting to look at how there's another podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of a podcast called The Sean Ryan Show. This is one of the problems with the fact that non-traditional sources of news, I guess, or opinion or information like ours are being listened to by so many millions of people. And we, because it's not a traditional institution of journalism, Sean Ryan was a former Navy SEAL. There's some suggestions that he might still be an asset of the U.S. military. And most recently, he had somebody on that had received a letter from the guy that blew up his Cybertruck in front of the Trump Hotel in Vegas. And this guy had received this letter from this guy who was a Green Beret. And he said, I'm being followed and I just need to get this information out there because they're, following me. And he had highlighted that the U.S. military had hit a number of civilians in an attack in Afghanistan back when, I think in 2019. And also that the U.S. was covering up that the aliens was actually China and Chinese technology. Now, a lot of this has been discredited since this was aired and has suggested that Sean Ryan and the people that he has on the show are assets of the U.S. military that are trying to stoke the fires of World War III. They're trying to stoke the war machine.
Well, that's not terrifying at all.
Right. So it's kind of like, this is, again, an example of how we're not sure what we can trust and what we can't because there's no way to vet this stuff anymore. My favorite poem of all time is a poem by William Butler Yeats. And it describes this moment in history perfectly. And Yeats wrote it in 1919 at the end of the First World War. And obviously the mass death that they had experienced in that conflict was nothing like the world had ever seen before. But it could describe our present circumstance, I feel, even better. So the poem's called The Second Coming. I'm going to read it. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of the spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. To me, we are the falcon, and the falconer were our institutions. Once we no longer trust in them, then things fall apart, and that's where we are in history. We are the indignant desert birds, left reeling as the results of our actions explode all around us. Giddy up.
I mean, in the short time we've been working on this episode, our Prime Minister has resigned as leader of the Liberal Party, and Hollywood is quite literally on fire. And by the time this goes to air, it's possible those aliens will have surfaced from the oceans. And, you know, it's so interesting to me how differently we approached this subject matter. And I know we've mentioned it a few times, but Shannon, I love how you want to know the catalyst, the backstory, the players and their motivation. You are the meat and bones. And I tend to gravitate more to the collective or the individual reaction, how it impacts the way we see the world around us, the fluffier I feel sentiments. So if you're the meat and bones, Shannon, I am undeniably the potatoes. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.